Aditya Digital Network presents the longest running episodic talk show in India in association with the Dusra.net, India's number one and only sports education and entertainment, India's most loved and cherished talk show host welcomes you to episode number 135 as the countdown begins for celebration of 150 episodes. Should national anthems be kept out of the purview of sports matches? Well, this is a debate that has been going on for centuries and has reached a rather sensitive stage. It may make sense to play the national anthem for matches in which you have the country versus country situation, but why do we need to play the national anthem when it is the case of domestic matches? It's baffling to say the least. We are all aware about the country versus club debate as far as domestic football leagues are concerned. For example, for which football team does a player like Messi or Ronaldo have their loyalty? Is it for teams like Barcelona or their respective countries? If we look at this in minutiae, then maybe playing for your domestic clubs or domestic teams may give you more freedom to express yourself than playing for your country, because for your country in that team you may have 11 iconic players and there may be a case of an ego clash. But when you play for your respective domestic teams, then the idea of ego clash diminishes. Even the attitude of the stakeholders, direct or indirect, towards the country or the domestic teams slash clubs is apparent. A majority of these domestic tournaments are private or semi-private, means that a loss or a win is no more than a monetary loss, but a loss as far as your country is concerned is more than just a monetary loss, and it goes a long way in having a debate whether the teams are prepared to play against opposition which are much better prepared and skilled. While this country versus domestic teams or club debate is still at a very nascent stage as far as cricket is concerned, though the thin line between the country and the respective domestic teams or clubs is diminishing. One can take the example of MS Dhoni or Sunil Chhetri. Both are in their late 30s and are at a stage where a majority of stakeholders and fanatics would want them to go so that younger players get a chance, because one feels that these individuals might be blocking a spot for more skilled players who are waiting to break into the team. But if we look at the case of Bangalore FC, for whom Chhetri plays, and Chennai Indians, for whom Dhoni plays, they are the marquee players, the MVP. And if these two do not play for these two teams respectively, then it will be a big financial loss for the owners, because you may not see a full house. On the other hand, you have 11 skilled players playing for your country, and you have 1,000 more waiting outside to get into the ranks. So yes, in that aspect, it's all about skills and winning compared to the monetary gains as far as your domestic teams and clubs are concerned. It even means that if you play well for your domestic team or the club, it doesn't mean that it will translate into memorable performances for the national team. But on the other hand, if there is a substandard performance while the player is part of the national team, one may not perform in a substandard manner for the domestic team, because the pressure of playing for a domestic team versus the pressure of playing for a national team over a period of time have become two distinct identities. For example, a Messi will always be known as someone who has played for Barcelona for years, and then we will know that he is from Argentina. One may play for the respective countries for maximum 10 to 12 years or even extend their career to 15 years, but as far as the connection to the respective domestic teams or club is concerned, it may be for a lifetime. For example, in football, a former retired player who has done well for his country and domestic teams may return as a coach for these domestic teams or clubs. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these same players who played for their country may coach their country one day. One can take the example of Zinedine Zidane. He was a marquee player, a MVP for France, but when he retired, he was recruited as a coach for the Real Madrid team. But the ego involved, the super ego involved in being a coach for your own national team, and all the complexity involved when you have so many entities involved in selecting coaches, especially for national teams. Zidane may or may not coach the French national team. And once Sunil Chetri retired, he may or may not be the part of the coaching team of his national team, that is India, but he may become a part of the coaching staff of Bengaluru FC, his domestic team. And same is the case with MS Dhoni. If tomorrow Dhoni retires, being a part of the coaching staff of the Chennai Indians domestic team may suit him more, as he has been a player for that particular team for over a decade, because there are no complex interviews or algorithms involved in being a part of the coaching staff of the domestic teams one was an integral part of for decades. And then the idea of rivalries also take a different shape, and this debate is going to be omnipresent. Imagine an Indian selection committee consisting of Harbhajan Singh, VVS Lakshman, and Sunil Gavaskar as the chief selector. It's a more competent lineup than the current individuals we have. But will this ever happen? That's a question we all need to ask. Well, this current selection team is lucky because MS Dhoni himself decided to recuse himself from playing, because if these individuals had to drop him or sack him from the team, then it could have been a national disaster. But their choices and the teams they select have been dubious to say the least. Insisting on keeping Dhawan, giving the excuse of the Rohit Dhawan partnership despite Dhawan's non-performances, shows their lack of training and aptitude for the same. This is one of the luckiest selection committee whose players have not played more than 5 matches in their entire career, compared to a team which has an experience of more than 1,000 matches. And while we can debate if experience is everything, this selection committee's attitude is like a fifth grader evaluating an individual who has a doctoral degree. And while such a comparison may look unsuitable and questionable, it is important to understand this in this particular context. The Indian Cricket Board should initiate a formal and a compulsory training program for the incoming selectors as to how would they talk with the media, what would be their attitude towards a certain player, how many chances would they give to a certain player, and what is the definition of dropping versus sacking. The new team may have not played 100 matches on their own or on an aggregate, but it doesn't mean that you select individuals who are incompetent and were given a lifeline because of obscure rules by the Supreme Court appointed committee of administrators whose tenure went on for too long. Does someone like Harbhajan have the aptitude to be a good selector? Well, if you're trained in the correct manner, you will develop that aptitude. But apart from Harbhajan and at best Lakshman, there are not too many players who have the competence, the skill, the understanding, and the aptitude to take up such a role. In fact, this responsibility should be given to those players who have often given castigating remarks about the current team, and maybe such a responsibility will rein in their obscure remarks. The West Indies tournament begins a week from this Friday. And despite the past performances in the recently concluded West Indies series in West Indies, where we trolled over them without breaking a sweat, one cannot take this team lightly. The selection committee erred by not giving chances to younger players. That is, they could have rested Rohit and Dhawan and tested the likes of Prithvi Shaw, Shuman Gill, and others. But then 20 overs is a game of fluke. The print and the electronic publications will reiterate on how the West Indies is a team of match winners but a team of mismatch players who have always preferred domestic teams over the country, and they play for the country rather reluctantly. It's not about being from West Indies, it's more about being from Barbados or Jamaica or St. Lucia or other such island. The notion that the West Indies team were a united team in the 70s and 80s is all apple sauce. They play because they have to play, not because they want to play. And West Indies will always remain a team of 11 talented individuals in their own right. But as it is in cricket, cricket is never about being a team sport. It is about 11 different individuals coming to play for their own selfish reasons, and cricket will always be seen in these terms. Will the series be closely fought? It's foolish to predict that right now, because what will happen cannot be predicted, and let it happen as it is supposed to happen. The Survivor Series pay per view did not spring much of a surprise as far as the two marquee championship matches were concerned, and Raw and SmackDown brands were generous enough to give the title of the best brand to the emerging brand in NXT. Now we have to understand that the current players whom we recognize as Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, Becky Lynch, and others are all products of this NXT. And what is NXT? In the most obscure definition, NXT is like playing domestic matches for your country, though this definition is not set in stone. Even if the struggle was for brand supremacy, there is never any brand loyalty. Wrestlers are drafted from one brand to the other as per convenience of the broadcasters and the stakeholders involved, so they are never deeply associated with one brand. It was always roving, but here it was the case of Raw versus SmackDown versus NXT. But when we talk about Raw and SmackDown, it was always about Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns, as they are the marquee, the MVP of their respective brands, and it was all on them to secure the win for their respective brands. And in this brand supremacy and personal rivalry, it was NXT who took advantage of the entire situation, and being an unknown quantity, went on to take the series 4 is to 2 is to 1. And once this particular Survivor Series pay per view gets over, it's back to square one. If the Raw brand united for a while against the other two brands and vice versa, now they are back to their own motives, that they have to win championships, they have to win matches against the same individuals with whom they teamed up a couple of weeks ago. And this has been the nature of WWE for generations. But if we talk about the two championship matches, the WWE championship match between Lesnar and Rey Mysterio, as well as the Universal Championship match between Bray Wyatt and Daniel Bryan, there was no question that Wyatt and Lesnar would retain their respective championship. And over the last couple of years, the matches involving Brock Lesnar have been of a rather short duration. He makes a quick meet of his opponents because that's always the way Brock Lesnar wants his matches to be. So he does not get injured too much and keeps his status as a marquee player and a MVP for the respective brand. Though they compensated Rey Mysterio for losing the championship by giving him the United States Championship, even though there was an outside interference which the referee did not notice, and all the emotions associated with this particular individual finally came out when he secured for himself the United States Championship. Will Daniel Bryan be also compensated in the same manner? Well, that is one question we are all waiting for, and we will come to know if he gets an opportunity for an alternate championship match, or will he have to go through a fatal four-way match like Mysterio did. As far as WWE is concerned, you never know what is next on their agenda. Those who have traveled abroad know about the air trains that run from one terminal to the other, as well as the trains which run from your gate till the baggage drop and vice versa. Will this be a possibility in the Indian airports? The IGI, the country's biggest airport, could get an air train or automated passenger mover to ensure smooth transit between Terminal 3 and the expanded Terminal 1 when it is ready by June 2022. One has seen these air trains, especially terminal to terminal air trains in the Singapore airport. And these terminals are very important as far as the transit of passengers are concerned. You cannot expect them to take shuttle buses or any other kind of transport because of the time taken and the time lost. And the cost cannot be an excuse if one wants them to be at par with the world's best airport, which includes Germany, US, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. And passenger convenience has to be an important part of that elusive dream of being the best airport. While the proposal of an inter-terminal transit air train is laudable, if the authorities can also add the air train, which if you have seen in airports like Heathrow and other international airports, which transit the passengers post the security check and immigration towards the gates, means have a separate building for immigrations, security check, and a separate building where the planes are parked. And as the airports expand more and more over the years, we will need these two different kinds of trains. One is the inter-terminal transit, and one is the transit from the security check and the immigration towards the gates, and vice versa. Operational cost will increase, but such increase in cost is always helpful when passengers come, and the airport also gets the tag of being passenger friendly. If a passenger has to transit from a domestic to an international terminal, then these air trains will save time. Now there are three options before the individual deciding on this: trams, elevated train, or something else. For me, elevated trains might just be the best option. The airport is a city on its own. So the facilities provided should be top notch, and the most important objective should be passenger convenience and passenger service. Between trams and elevated trains might just be a more logical option in terms of construction and logistical requirements. For the past 7 to 8 years, there has been a constant debate that whether the likes of Ola, Uber, Lyft, and other such cab companies are a disruptor to the normal transportation services in a city. In a country like India, Ola, Uber, and other such companies are not disruptors but the missing piece of the puzzle that was Indian transportation, with special emphasis on public transportation. While one can laud the effort of the transport authority with respect to the train and bus services, it is not always plausible to take bus and train all the time. One may need another form of transport, that is the personalized taxis for transit. In most Indian cities, this was lacking, especially the capital city. The personalized public taxis were like finding a needle in a stack of needles. Such was the paucity which even the likes of autos, that is the three-wheeler transport, were not able to fulfill. At any point in time, autos were not safe. They are a traffic hazard whose drivers don't follow the law as far as following a certain meter rate is concerned. To fulfill this very lacune, the likes of Ola, Uber were needed, and they have fulfilled the need of a privatized public taxi. When at times it is not plausible to take metro or bus, especially in areas where the metro and the bus stations are miles away from one's workplace, colleges, or home. If the bus and the train stations are more than a mile away, then one will prefer taking a taxi, and one will prefer a four-wheeler private public taxi than a three-wheeler accident prone and danger to one and all taxi. Instead of being critical of these companies, we can have such a process that all transportations can run simultaneously without impeding the other. Outside airports, bus stations, train stations, railway stations, if we can have pockets where we can have the autos, the taxis, and these companies being given space, then we leave it to the user which one they want to use as per their convenience, therefore shedding the tag of being rival to the other. You give a choice to the user and let them choose which transportation they prefer. This way, nobody will complain about their business being harmed. In conclusion, as far as Indian cities go, especially Delhi, where the four-wheeler taxi system was never in vogue, unlike Calcutta or Bombay, such taxi companies were needed. This brings to an end episode number 135 on the 27th of November 2019. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode. Please send your valuable suggestions through your comments and audio recording to the email ID adityatherewriter@gmail.com. You can also like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and Facebook page, and stay tuned for the next episode.